My son-in-law called me a washed-up shop teacher at his tech company's investor gala. While everyone laughed and my daughter stayed silent, I just smiled, finished my water, and quietly left the ballroom. What they didn't know was that I'd already done the math on his startup's finances. By the time I reached my car, I knew exactly how to dismantle everything he'd built on lies. Before I continue, I need you to understand something. I'm not a vengeful man by nature. I spent 33 years teaching carpentry and industrial arts at Westmount Technical High School in Montreal. I taught kids how to measure twice and cut once, how to read blueprints, how to turn raw materials into something useful. I never made much money. Teacher's salary in Quebec isn't impressive, but I helped hundreds of teenagers find careers in the trades. Some of them now run their own contracting businesses. That was always enough for me. My daughter Sarah is my only child. Her mother, my wife Claire, passed away from cancer when Sarah was 16. It was just the two of us after that, living in our modest duplex in NDG. Sarah was brilliant, straight A's, scholarship to McGill, degree in business administration. She got a job at a marketing firm downtown, started dating this guy named Derek Holloway about 2 years ago. I met Derek for the first time at a restaurant in Old Montreal. Sarah had been gushing about him for months, successful entrepreneur, founded his own tech company, Harvard MBA. The restaurant was one of those places where they don't list prices on the menu. I wore my good sport jacket, the navy one I'd bought for parent-teacher conferences. Derek showed up 20 minutes late. No apology, just slid into his seat and immediately started checking his phone. He was 34, Sarah's age, with that particular confidence that comes from never being told no. When he finally looked at me, his eyes did that quick assessment jacket, watch, shoes, and I watched something shift in his expression. "Mr. Morrison, good to finally meet you," he said, shaking my hand with the bare minimum pressure. "Sarah's told me so much about you. High school teacher, right?" "Industrial arts," I said. "Woodworking, metalwork, technical drafting." "Ah." He nodded in that way people do when they're already moving past what you've said, very hands-on. The dinner was excruciating. Derek talked about his company, Velocity Tech Solutions, for 40 minutes straight. They were developing some kind of AI-powered logistics platform. His investors, his revenue projections, his 5-year plan to take the company public. Every few minutes he'd throw in a comment about real entrepreneurship or taking risks instead of playing it safe. When Sarah asked me about work, Derek's phone buzzed. He checked it while I was mid-sentence about a student who'd just gotten an apprenticeship. The bill came to $280. I reached for my wallet. I'd brought enough to cover my share, but Derek waved me off with theatrical generosity. "Don't worry about it, Mr. Morrison. I've got this. I know teacher pensions in Quebec are, well, let's just say they're not exactly generous." Sarah smiled at him like he'd done something noble. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel of my 12-year-old Civic. It wasn't the money that bothered me. It was the dismissal in his voice, the casual way he'd reduced 33 years of work to not exactly generous. Over the next 6 months, I saw Derek's pattern more clearly. He visited our duplex once Sarah wanted to show him where she'd grown up. He walked through our living room, took in the second-hand furniture, the worn carpets, the bookshelf I'd built myself in 1989. "Cozy," he said, which wasn't a compliment. His parents were worse. Richard and Victoria Holloway lived in Westmount proper, in one of those gray stone mansions that cost $3 million. Richard had made his money in pharmaceutical sales, retired at 55. Victoria sat on the boards of 3 different charities. They invited us for dinner in September. Their dining room had a chandelier that probably cost more than my annual salary. Victoria served something she called deconstructed coq au vin on plates so delicate I was afraid to cut anything. "So, Douglas," Richard said, pouring wine I didn't recognize, "Sarah tells us you're in education." "I teach at a technical high school," I said. "Been there since 1990. Public school." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. How admirable. It must be so rewarding, working with those kinds of students. I knew what she meant. The kids who couldn't afford private school. The kids who'd work with their hands because they weren't going to McGill or Concordia. "Very rewarding," I said evenly. "Many of my students make excellent livings in the trades. Electricians, welders, cabinet makers. Good, honest work. Of course, Victoria said, though I imagine Sarah might want something more for her own children someday. Financial security, opportunities, the right schools. Sarah looked down at her plate. Derek squeezed her hand. Don't worry, he said. I'll make sure Sarah and our future family are very well taken care of. Not everyone can provide that kind of life, but fortunately, I can. He looked at me when he said it. I finished my meal in silence. 3 weeks later, Sarah called me with news. Derek had proposed. She was ecstatic, talking about wedding venues and dress shopping. I told her I was happy for her, and I meant it. She deserved happiness. But something cold was settling in my chest. The engagement party was at Derek's office in downtown Montreal, a converted warehouse in Griffintown with exposed brick and those industrial light fixtures that cost $2,000 each. Velocity Tech Solutions occupied the entire third floor. About 70 people attended. Derek's employees, some investors, friends of the family. I arrived in my good jacket again. The party was already in full swing. Sarah found me by the entrance, beautiful in a cocktail dress I'd never seen before. Dad! I'm so glad you're here. She hugged me, then pulled back, her smile faltering slightly. Listen, Derek's about to do a toast. He's a bit nervous about the investors being here, so if anyone asks, maybe just, keep it general about your work. What do you mean? Just. Derek's worried that some of his investors are old-fashioned. They might not understand that teaching is a respectable career. I looked at my daughter. You're asking me to downplay being a teacher? I'm asking you not to make tonight difficult. She walked away before I could respond. I found myself standing near the bar, nursing a beer I didn't want, watching Derek work the room. He was good at it, moving from group to group, laughing at the right moments, making everyone feel included, except me. He'd nodded once in my direction when I arrived and hadn't looked at me since. Around 8 o'clock, Derek climbed onto a small stage they'd set up. Someone handed him a microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began. The room quieted. Starting a company requires vision. It requires taking risks that other people won't take. It requires, and I can't stress this enough, the courage to bet on yourself when everyone else is choosing the safe path. He paused. His eyes swept the room and landed on me for just a moment. Growing up, I watched my father build a successful career through ambition and calculated risk. He taught me that security is the enemy of greatness. While some people are content with steady paychecks and summers off, entrepreneurs are building the future. Scattered laughter. Someone near me whispered, "Is that a dig at someone?" Victoria Holloway, standing with a group of well-dressed women, said not quite quietly enough, "Well, we can't all afford to take risks when we have modest means. Some people need that government pension." More laughter. Sarah's face went red, but she didn't say anything. She was standing next to Derek's sister, both of them looking at their champagne glasses. Derek continued, "I'm grateful Sarah understands the difference between settling and striving. She could have chosen an easier life, a more predictable path. But she chose excellence." He raised his glass. Everyone applauded. I set down my beer and walked out. No one stopped me. No one even seemed to notice. I drove home through the October darkness, past the luxury condos on the Lachine Canal, past the restaurants where people paid $30 for appetizers, back to my duplex where the porch light was flickering because I hadn't replaced the bulb yet. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Sarah with her homework for 12 years, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, exactly. Recognition. I'd spent my whole career teaching students to identify problems, analyze structures, find weaknesses in design. Derek Holloway was a structure with weaknesses. I just needed to find them. I went to my basement workshop, pulled out a cardboard box from the storage shelf, and brought it upstairs. Inside were files from the part of my life I rarely talked about. Before I became a teacher, I'd worked for 6 years as a quality control inspector for an engineering firm. I'd learned to read financial documents, architectural plans, compliance reports. I'd helped identify construction fraud twice, contractors cutting corners, billing for materials they never used. I opened my laptop and started searching. Velocity Tech Solutions had a website with a press section. I found 3 articles about their recent funding round. $4 million from a consortium of investors, valuation at $15 million. I spent the next 4 hours reading everything I could find about the company. Their product was an AI logistics platform that supposedly optimized delivery routes for e-commerce companies. Very technical, very impressive sounding. But something felt off about the numbers in their press releases. The next morning, I called an old colleague from my engineering firm days. Marcel Tremblay had moved into financial analysis, working for a firm that did due diligence on tech startups. Doug Morrison, he said when he answered. Must be, what, 8 years? 9. Listen, Marcel, I need a favor. You ever heard of a company called Velocity Tech Solutions? A pause. Derek Holloway's outfit? Yeah. They've been making noise in the Montreal tech scene. Why? He's marrying my daughter. I'm trying to understand his business. Ah, another pause. Look, I can't give you proprietary information, but let's just say, if I were doing due diligence on that company, I'd have questions. What kind of questions? The kind where the revenue projections don't match the actual customer base. The kind where the technical specifications sound impressive but lack specifics. You want my honest opinion? Someone who knows how to read financial statements should take a close look at their numbers. I thanked him and hung up. I spent the next 2 weeks becoming an expert on Velocity Tech Solutions. I read every article, every press release, every public filing with the Quebec Business Registry. I found their company documents online. They'd posted some financial projections in a pitch deck to attract investors. And then I found it. A small notation in their revenue recognition methodology. They were booking future contracted revenue as current income. A client would sign a 3-year contract for $60,000 annually, and Velocity would report $180,000 in immediate revenue, even though they'd only collected the first $20,000. It wasn't illegal, technically, but it was aggressive, very aggressive. And if their client retention rate wasn't as good as they claimed, the whole structure would collapse. I dug deeper. I found a message board for tech workers in Montreal where a few former Velocity employees had posted anonymously. Complaints about unpaid overtime, pressure to inflate user engagement numbers, meetings where Derek had told them to be creative with their customer retention statistics. I documented everything. Then I reached out to someone I'd taught 15 years ago. Kevin Chen had been one of my best students, quiet kid, brilliant with technical drafting. He'd gone on to become a software engineer. Now he worked at Shopify in Ottawa. Mr. Morrison, he said when I called. This is amazing. How are you? I'm well, Kevin. Listen, I need some technical advice. You know anything about AI logistics platforms? A bit. Why? I explained what I'd found about Velocity Tech Solutions, left out the personal connection, just framed it as curiosity. Kevin was quiet for a moment. You're talking about Velocity? Yeah, I've heard things. Their technology isn't as sophisticated as they claim. A friend of mine interviewed there last year. He said their AI is basically just an optimization algorithm from the early 2000s with a new interface. Nothing proprietary, nothing innovative. He turned down the job. Is that something investors would care about? If they knew, absolutely. If you're valuing a company at $15 million based on proprietary technology, and it turns out there's no proprietary technology, that's fraud, Mr. Morrison. I thanked him and added this to my documentation. By mid-November, I had a file folder 2 inches thick. Revenue recognition issues, inflated user metrics, technology that was essentially purchased open-source software repackaged, customer contracts that were dramatically overstated. None of it was conclusive proof of fraud, but together it painted a picture of a company built on exaggeration at best, lies at worst. The wedding was planned for January 14th at the Mount Royal Club. $800 per plate. 150 guests. Sarah had asked me for my guest list. I'd given her 5 names, 3 former colleagues and 2 old friends. 2 weeks later, she'd called to say the venue had capacity constraints. Only 2 of my guests could come. I didn't argue. The week before Christmas, Derek's company held their annual investor gala at the Marriott Chateau Champlain. It was a big event. Investors, clients, tech media, even a reporter from the Montreal Gazette. Derek had invited Sarah, obviously, and she'd asked if I wanted to come. Derek said it would be good for me to network, she explained. And I thought, maybe you'd like to see his world, see what he's built. I said yes. I bought a new suit for the occasion. Nothing extravagant, but well-tailored charcoal gray. I looked like someone who'd spent 33 years earning a respectable living, which is exactly what I was. The ballroom was decorated like something from a tech conference, blue LED lighting, massive screens showing Velocity Tech's metrics and growth projections, tables with those high cocktail chairs that are designed to keep people from sitting too long. I arrived at 7. Sarah found me immediately, looking stressed. Dad, thank God. Listen, Derek's really nervous about tonight. Some major investors are here, and he's doing a presentation. Just be supportive, okay? When have I not been supportive? She gave me a look that suggested she had thoughts about that, but didn't voice them. The presentation started at 8. Derek took the stage in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Behind him, the screens showed graphs, revenue climbing, user base expanding, market projections that looked like hockey sticks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for believing in Velocity Tech Solutions, he began. 3 years ago, I had a vision. I saw a future where artificial intelligence would revolutionize logistics, where small businesses could compete with giants like Amazon, and I had a choice. I could play it safe, take the easy road, accept a comfortable but unremarkable life, or I could take a risk. He clicked to the next slide. I chose risk, because that's what separates entrepreneurs from everyone else. While some people are content with secure jobs and predictable pensions, he paused for effect, and his eyes found me in the crowd. Just for a second, but I saw it. So did Sarah, who was standing 3 feet away from me. Entrepreneurs are willing to sacrifice that security for greatness. We don't want summers off. We want to build empires. Polite laughter rippled through the room. Victoria Holloway was standing nearby with a group of other investors' wives. She leaned toward one of them close enough that I could hear and said, "Of course. Not everyone has the stomach for entrepreneurship. Some people need the safety net of tenure and government benefits. No shame in that." The woman next to her glanced at me, then back at Victoria. "Is that?" Sarah's father, Victoria said quietly. "He teaches shop class. Very reliable work, I'm sure." More laughter, barely suppressed. Derek continued his presentation. More slides, more impressive-sounding numbers. At one point he said, "Our Q3 revenue was $600,000, with projections for $1.2 million in Q4. We're on track for $8 million annual revenue by next year." I'd seen their actual filings. Their Q3 revenue was closer to $150,000. The $600,000 included 2 years of future contracted payments that hadn't been collected yet. The presentation ended to applause. People swarmed Derek, congratulating him, asking questions. Sarah went to his side immediately, beaming. An hour later, after the formal presentation, Derek worked the room with a microphone, doing informal Q&A with investors. He made his way near where I was standing with my water glass, talking to a group of younger employees. One of them, clearly several drinks in, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Derek, man, where'd you get the confidence? Like, my dad wanted me to be an accountant, something safe. How'd you know to ignore that?" Derek laughed. "You have to trust yourself more than you trust other people's fear. My father-in-law, for example, he gestured vaguely in my direction, spent his whole life in a classroom. Stable, pension, benefits. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not building anything. It's just maintaining." The group turned to look at me. I was 15 feet away, clearly within earshot. "I mean, look at him," Derek continued, his voice carrying. "He's wearing what, a $150 suit? Driving a car that's older than some of our interns? That's the safe path. That's what happens when you choose security over ambition." Someone in his group laughed uncomfortably. Derek grinned, encouraged. "Honestly, when I first met him, I thought Sarah was joking. My dad teaches shop class. Like, buddy, it's 2023. Who still does that? But hey, someone's got to teach the kids who aren't going to university, right? Might as well be someone who's already given up on real success." The laughter was louder now. Not everyone, some people looked uncomfortable, but enough. Victoria was laughing behind her champagne flute. Richard Holloway, standing nearby, shook his head with an indulgent smile like Derek was a precocious child. And Sarah. My daughter was standing at the edge of Derek's circle, her face bright red. She'd heard everything. She looked at me once, just once, and then she turned away and started a conversation with someone else. I set down my water glass and walked toward the exit, past the LED screens showing false metrics, past the investors who'd swallowed Derek's pitch without questioning the numbers, past my daughter who didn't call after me. In the parking garage, I sat in my 12-year-old Civic and breathed. My hands were shaking not from anger, but from something colder and more focused. Clarity. I drove home, went straight to my basement workshop, and pulled out the file folder I'd been building for 2 months. Everything was documented. Every discrepancy, every inflated metric, every piece of evidence that Velocity Tech Solutions was a house of cards. At 11 that night, I composed an email. The recipients were the Ontario Securities Commission and the Autorité des Marchés Financiers in Quebec. The subject line was, "Formal complaint regarding revenue recognition, practices, and material misrepresentation by Velocity Tech Solutions Incorporated." I attached 30 pages of documentation, financial discrepancies, screenshots of deleted LinkedIn posts from former employees, technical analysis from Kevin Chen about the company's non-proprietary technology, comparisons between public statements and actual filed documents. I didn't sign it with my name. I used a temporary email address and routed it through a VPN, something a former student who worked in IT security had taught me about. At 11:47 p.m. on December 21st, I hit send. Then I went to bed. Christmas came and went. Sarah invited me for dinner at Derek's condo. I went, brought a gift, said nothing about the gala. Derek was pleasant to me in that distant way wealthy people are pleasant to service workers. Sarah seemed relieved that I wasn't making things difficult. I spent Boxing Day in my workshop, building a jewelry box from reclaimed oak. My hands know this work, measuring, cutting, sanding, fitting joints that will last decades. Honest work. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Sarah had asked me to give a speech at the reception. I'd told her I'd think about it. On January 4th, the article appeared in the Globe and Mail's business section. Montreal tech startup faces regulatory scrutiny over financial practices. It was a small article, easy to miss if you weren't looking. It mentioned Velocity Tech Solutions by name. It noted that the company was facing questions from securities regulators about its revenue recognition methods and whether it had made material misrepresentations to investors. Derek's company issued a statement calling it a routine inquiry and expressed confidence in their financial practices. But I knew how these things worked. Once regulators start asking questions, they don't stop. And when they looked closely at Velocity Tech's numbers, they'd find exactly what I'd found. Sarah called me that evening, her voice tight. "Did you see the article?" I did. Derek's devastated. This could ruin everything. The wedding, the company, his reputation. If his numbers are honest, he has nothing to worry about. A long silence. "Dad, you didn't have anything to do with this, did you?" "Me? I'm a shop teacher, remember? I teach kids how to use table saws. What would I know about securities regulation?" Another silence, longer this time. "I have to go," she said, and hung up. Over the next week, 3 more articles appeared. One in the Montreal Gazette, one in TechCrunch, one in Canadian Business Magazine. Each one cited unnamed sources familiar with the investigation. Each one dug a little deeper into Velocity Tech's questionable practices. 2 of Derek's major investors pulled out, citing concerns about financial transparency. The company's valuation dropped from $15 million to $8 million in less than 10 days. On January 10th, 4 days before the wedding, Derek called me directly. It was the first time he'd called me in 2 years of dating my daughter. "Mr. Morrison, we need to talk." "About what?" "You know damn well about what." "The investigation, the articles. This all started right after the gala. Coincidence, I suppose." "Bullshit." His voice was hard now, the polished entrepreneur persona gone. "I know this was you. I don't know how, But I know. Derek, I'm a 62-year-old shop teacher. I don't have the kind of connections or knowledge to trigger a securities investigation. But if the regulators found problems with your company, maybe you should ask yourself why those problems existed in the first place. You're trying to destroy my company. I didn't create the problems they're finding. You did. He hung up. The wedding went ahead as planned. I wore my new suit. I sat where I was assigned, table 19, near the kitchen doors, with cousins of Derek's I'd never met. Sarah was beautiful walking down the aisle, and for those 3 minutes, I forgot everything else and just watched my daughter. The reception was formal and expensive and perfectly choreographed. I sat quietly through dinner, through the speeches, through Derek's toast where he thanked his parents for showing him what success looks like. I didn't give a speech. Sarah had quietly removed me from the schedule. At the end of the night, as guests were leaving, Derek approached me. We were standing by the coat check, alone for the first time. I don't know exactly what you did, he said quietly, but it's not over. My lawyers are looking into everything, and when they find proof, You'll what? I met his eyes. Sue me? For what? I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't lied about you. I haven't harassed you. If there's an investigation into your business practices, that's between you and the regulators. His jaw clenched. You're a bitter old man who couldn't handle that your daughter chose someone successful. No, I said. I'm a father who taught his daughter to value honesty. You should try it sometime. I left him standing there and drove home. 2 weeks after the wedding, the final blow came. The Autorité des Marchés Financiers released their preliminary findings. Velocity Tech Solutions had materially misrepresented their revenue by booking multi-year contracts as immediate income. They'd inflated their user base by counting trial accounts as active subscribers. Their proprietary AI technology was in fact open-source software with minimal modifications. The company's valuation dropped to $3 million. 5 investors sued for fraud. Derek's board of directors voted him out as CEO. Sarah didn't call me. I went back to teaching. In February, I started a new semester with a class of grade 11 students learning basic woodworking. One of them, a kid named Marcus who'd been bouncing between foster homes, showed real talent with a chisel. I stayed after class twice a week to work with him. In March, on a Sunday morning, there was a knock at my door. Sarah stood on my porch, her eyes red. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. We sat in my kitchen, the same table, where I'd done my research, where I'd built the case that destroyed her husband's company. "Derek knows it was you," she said. "He can't prove it, but he knows." "Is that why you're here? To accuse me?" "No." She was crying now. "I'm here because I need to know why. Why would you do that to him?" "Do what? Tell the truth about his business practices? Destroy his career, humiliate him, ruin everything we'd built together." I looked at my daughter, this brilliant woman I'd raised alone, and chose my words carefully. At that gala, Derek called me a failure. He mocked my career, my car, my clothes, everything I've built in 33 years. He did it publicly, deliberately, to humiliate me. And you, Sarah, you stood there and said nothing. You turned away. She flinched. "I'm not a rich man," I continued. "I never will be. I make $48,000 a year helping teenagers learn skills that will earn them honest livings. I drive an old car and live in a duplex, and I'm proud of that." But Derek looked at my life and saw failure. He saw something worth mocking. "It was just talk, Dad." He didn't mean, yes, he did. And worse, his company was built on lies. Those investors who trusted him, he was defrauding them. Those employees who believed in his vision, he was inflating metrics to keep them working overtime without proper compensation. That's not entrepreneurship. That's fraud. So you destroyed him. No, I exposed him. There's a difference. Sarah wiped her eyes. I should have defended you. At the engagement party, at the gala, I should have said something. Yes, you should have. We sat in silence for a long moment. "Derek's working for a consulting firm now," she said finally. $45,000 a year. He's angry all the time. At me, at himself, at you. The marriage is barely holding together. I'm sorry you're going through that. Are you, though? I thought about it. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm not sorry I held him accountable. She nodded slowly. He asked me to choose. Between you and him, my chest tightened. What did you say? I said I needed time to think. She stood, gathering her coat. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. Figure some things out. You're always welcome here. She paused at the door. I looked into what you did. The documentation you must have gathered. The analysis. The way you filed the complaint so it couldn't be traced back to you. That wasn't the work of a washed-up shop teacher, Dad. That was brilliant. I told you. I teach kids to find problems and fix them. Derek was the problem? Derek's dishonesty was the problem. I just fixed it. She left without another word. I stood at my kitchen window, watching her car disappear down the street, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, exactly. Maybe just peace. I'd stood up for myself. I'd used the skills I'd spent a lifetime developing: patience, attention to detail, thorough analysis to defend my dignity. Derek Holloway had learned that contempt has consequences. 3 months later, Sarah filed for divorce. She didn't call to tell me. I saw it through a mutual friend. But 2 weeks after that, she did call. I'm moving into my own apartment, she said. 2-bedroom in Verdun. I wondered if maybe you could help me build a bookshelf. I remember that one you made for my room when I was 14. I still have the plans, I said. When do you want to start? This weekend? I'll bring my tools. We spent Saturday afternoon in her empty apartment measuring wall space, drawing up plans, cutting wood. She asked questions about joints and finishing techniques. I taught her the same way I'd taught 1,000 students, patiently, thoroughly, showing her how to do it right. At one point, while we were sanding the boards, she said quietly, I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it. I know. Derek was wrong about you, about your work, your life, everything. You're not a failure. You're the opposite of that. I'm a shop teacher. That's all I ever claimed to be. No. You're someone who taught me that honest work matters, that integrity matters. I forgot that for a while. We finished the bookshelf by early evening. It wasn't fancy pine boards with simple joints, but it was straight and level, and it would last. As I packed up my tools, Sarah ran her hand along the smooth wood. Thank you, she said, for this, for everything. I hugged my daughter, and for the first time in months, it felt like maybe we'd be okay. As I drove home that evening, past the gray stone mansions of Westmount where Derek's parents still lived, past the converted warehouses of Griffintown where Velocity Tech's empty office space was now for lease, I thought about something I used to tell my students on their first day of class. Measure twice, cut once, I'd say. And remember, the strength of what you build depends on the integrity of your materials. Use cheap materials, cut corners, ignore the fundamentals, and everything will eventually collapse. But do the work right, with honest materials and careful craftsmanship, and you'll create something that lasts. Derek Holloway had built his company with lies. I'd simply measured twice and made the cut that brought it all down. My hands were steady on the wheel. The sun was setting over Montreal, painting the sky orange and gold. And for the first time since that dinner in old Montreal 2 years ago, I felt like myself again. Not a failure, not a joke, just a 62-year-old shop teacher who'd taught one more lesson about the consequences of disrespect. Tomorrow I'd go back to class. Marcus had a project, do a jewelry box for his foster mother. I'd promised to help him get the dovetail joints right. That was my life. Honest work, honest materials, honest consequences. And I wouldn't change a thing.